The sky over Earth had turned a permanent shade of gray, a color that felt too heavy for the world it blanketed. Beneath the storm clouds, Captain Mara Quinn stood alone on the desolate precipice of a once proud military installation. The acrid scent of burned metal and charred flesh lingered in the air as far as the eye could see. Her boots crunched against the cracked earth, her eyes fixed on the alien ships hovering in the distance, their gleaming underbellies reflecting the dying light of the day. "Ready to die for Earth, Captain?" The voice crackled through her comms, the familiar sound of Lieutenant Phelps grounding her in the moment. "Not yet," Mara replied, her voice clipped, cold. The war had drained everything from her, hope, humanity, even fear. All that remained was the unshakable resolve to see this through. The Zythar Empire had invaded without mercy, and humanity had crumbled beneath their weight. Only pockets of resistance remained, and Mara's squad was the last. Her eyes scanned the horizon as a low hum reverberated in her bones, a warning. The Zythar had made their presence known once again. A column of massive warships loomed in the sky, descending like locusts on a dying field. Mara tightened her grip around her weapon, feeling the cold metal soothe her nerves. "We don't have much time," Phelps said. "They're moving in faster than we thought. You sure you want to do this?" Mara didn't respond immediately. Her gaze shifted to the memorial wall behind her, where the names of fallen soldiers were etched into stone. Friends, comrades, family, gone. Her mind flashed back to their last moments, fighting side by side, and the crushing silence that had followed their deaths. "I'm not doing this for me," she said finally, her voice raw. "I'm doing this for them." There was a brief silence on the other end of the comms. Then Phelps spoke again, softer this time. "Understood, Mara. We're with you." Mara took one last look at the sky before turning to face her team. 3 soldiers, battered but unbroken, stood behind her, each with their eyes locked onto the battlefield ahead. The Zythar were relentless, and humanity had fought this long simply to survive. But Mara wouldn't let them die without a fight. Not while there was even a shred of hope left. The sound of approaching engines grew louder, and soon, the Zythar began to land, their ships touching down with a reverberating thud. Massive armored figures disembarked, their dark, biomechanical forms looming like shadows against the fading light. Mara's pulse quickened. The Zythar were here, and there was no running now. It was time for the final charge. "Everyone ready?" she called, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Phelps gave a short nod, his face hardened, the weariness of years of war etched into his features. "Always. Let's end this." One by one, her soldiers checked their weapons and activated their shields, the soft hum of energy fields surrounding them. Mara nodded sharply, signaling for the team to move out. They crept toward the Zythar's command center, a sprawling structure at the heart of the installation. Every step was calculated, every movement a testament to the countless hours they'd spent in training. They were professionals, warriors to the core, but even that didn't dull the gnawing dread that clung to their minds. As they advanced, the wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of alien weaponry, a chilling reminder of just how outmatched they were. Mara's gaze shifted to Phelps, who was scanning the horizon, his sharp eyes searching for any sign of an incoming ambush. "Something's not right," he muttered, his fingers twitching near the trigger. Before Mara could respond, a sudden explosion ripped through the air, throwing them off balance. The ground trembled beneath them as the enemy's forces unleashed their devastating firepower. Screams echoed over the comms, followed by the harsh crackle of static. A portion of the ground ahead of them erupted in a hail of fire and debris, sending shards of rock and metal hurtling through the air. "We need to move, now!" Mara shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Her soldiers scrambled to regroup, but the Zythar were already on them, their soldiers closing in from all sides. The ambush was perfect. Mara's heart pounded in her chest as she ducked behind a crumbling pillar, pulling a small device from her belt, a last-ditch weapon, the only option they had left. "We hold them off, Mara." "You get that thing working," Phelps commanded, his face grim but determined. Mara didn't hesitate. She slapped the device into the ground and began entering the launch sequence. The countdown began, the beeping sound filling the air as the device powered up. "We can't keep them back for long," one of her soldiers yelled, taking cover and firing his rifle. The tension in the air was thick with the scent of burning fuel and the sharp crack of gunfire. The Zythar soldiers closed in, their weapons humming with lethal energy. Mara's fingers flew across the device, the seconds ticking by with agonizing slowness. She glanced up once more to see the alien forces surrounding them, a force so overwhelming it seemed impossible to defeat. But her will remained unbroken. "Come on, damn it," she whispered through gritted teeth. The countdown reached its final seconds. And then, a blinding flash of light. The ground shook with a reverberating pulse of energy. Mara Quinn's breath caught in her throat as the explosion washed over her, deafening and blinding. She staggered back, her legs unsteady beneath her, but she held her ground, her eyes fixed on the smoldering crater where the Zythar had once stood. The air was thick with the acrid scent of scorched earth and burnt metal. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had come before, and everything that was about to follow. "Phelps?" Her voice crackled through the comm, but there was no response. She wiped ash from her visor and looked over to where he had been. The smoke had cleared, but the battlefield had shifted. "Lieutenant." Her voice rose in urgency. A sharp voice cut through the chaos. "We're still here, Captain." Phelps's voice was gruff but steady, his figure emerging from the haze, dragging himself out from behind a piece of debris. His armor was scorched, but he was alive. A good sign, but not for long. They had no time to celebrate. "Status?" Mara's voice was low, commanding. "We've lost 3 men, Phelps said, kneeling to check a pulse on one of the fallen soldiers. "The rest are scattered. We need to regroup, now." His eyes locked with hers, his expression grim. "The Zythar aren't just here for the fight, Captain. They're here to wipe us off the map. We need to make a move, and fast." Mara clenched her jaw. "I know." The Zythar forces had always been relentless, but this was something different. Something personal. The core of their army, the commanding unit, had arrived, bigger, faster, and far more advanced than anything humanity had ever faced. Their ships hovered above like vultures, their sleek silhouettes casting an eerie shadow on the ground below. Mara could feel it in her bones. This was no longer just a battle for survival. This was a war for the very soul of her species. She turned, scanning the horizon. A tangle of wreckage lay ahead, fragments of human defenses scattered like broken toys. The memorial wall, once a symbol of hope, was nothing but a pile of rubble now. The hope of victory seemed like a distant memory. "We need to hit their command center," Mara said, her tone low but resolute. "It's the only chance we have." Phelps frowned, wiping dirt from his face. "You really think we can take it out?" "With what? We've got maybe half our strength, and the enemy's got a full battalion just sitting pretty above us. Then we'll give them a reason to move." Mara's words were sharp, precise. There was no room for hesitation. "We've got one weapon left. If we don't use it now, we lose everything." Phelps met her gaze, his expression hardening. "And if it doesn't work?" "Then we die trying," she said quietly. There was no more time for argument. They were past that point now. Without hesitation, Mara activated the ancient device that had been their last hope, or relic of a long-forgotten war buried deep beneath the earth. The AI's voice, cold and metallic, hummed to life as the countdown began. The soldiers gathered around, keeping watch, their rifles trained on the alien vessels looming overhead. The tension was palpable, a tangible force in the air, the kind that made even seasoned warriors question if they could truly survive this. "We've done the impossible before," Phelps said, his voice tight with the weight of the situation. "We can do it again." Mara glanced at him, seeing the doubt in his eyes despite his words. But there was no room for doubt anymore. She'd seen the Zythar obliterate entire cities with nothing but the flick of a finger. If this last-ditch plan failed, Earth would be lost. Humanity would be lost. The countdown hit its final second, and the device flared to life with a brilliant pulse of blue energy. For a brief moment, the battlefield froze, as if the universe itself had paused. The hum of the device was deafening as it fired, sending a shockwave rippling across the terrain. "Here we go," Mara muttered under her breath. The ground shook violently, and the sky seemed to crack open as the device unleashed its full power. The alien ships in the distance faltered, their shields flickering in the wake of the blast. But as the smoke cleared, it was clear that the enemy was adapting quickly. The Zythar were resilient, and their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. "We've just poked the hornet's nest," Phelps growled, his voice tight with the realization of what they were up against. Mara's heart sank. The energy surge had temporarily disabled the Zythar's shields, but it wasn't enough to cripple them. They were still coming, more formidable than ever. "We need to fall back," Phelps urged, his voice laced with urgency. "No," Mara said, shaking her head. "We fight. We push forward." Phelps's face twisted in frustration, but there was no room for debate. The war had always been about survival, but now it was about something greater. It was about humanity's will to resist, to show the invaders that even in the face of annihilation, they would not bow. With a final, determined glance at Phelps, Mara led the charge toward the heart of the Zythar forces. Every step was a defiance of the odds. Every breath was a testament to human tenacity. "We'll give them a war they won't forget," she muttered, her voice steady as she closed in on the alien command center. As they pressed on, the sounds of battle rose to a deafening crescendo. The final stand was only beginning. The ground trembled beneath Mara's feet as she led her squad through the remnants of the old military base. Smoke swirled in the air, staining the world in shades of gray and black. The once proud structure, now reduced to smoldering ruins, was a silent testament to humanity's desperate struggle for survival. There was no sign of the Zythar's immediate retaliation yet, but Mara knew it was coming. Her fingers clenched tightly around her rifle as she navigated the broken landscape. The distant hum of alien engines was a constant reminder of the threat hanging over them. Every second they spent in this exposed position was a second closer to their end. Yet she held steady, her focus unwavering. In this chaos, where so much had already been lost, there could be no hesitation. "Captain." Phelps's voice came through the comms, low and serious. "We're nearly at the command center. The Zythar haven't moved, yet. But I can't shake the feeling that they're waiting for us." Mara didn't respond immediately. The familiar weight of doubt gnawed at the back of her mind, but she ignored it. If she started second-guessing her every move now, they would be dead before they even reached the heart of the Zythar forces. "We'll be ready for them," she replied, her voice steely. The squad moved forward, the tension mounting with each step. The air felt thick, heavy with the scent of burning debris and the promise of destruction. Mara's thoughts kept returning to the device, its one shot, its one hope. The alien fleet's shield was still temporarily down from their earlier strike, but she knew it wouldn't last forever. Time was not on their side. They reached the outer perimeter of the command center, where the remnants of the Zythar defenses lay in ruins. The alien structures, sleek, metallic, and unsettling in their simplicity, loomed in the distance, their faint glow cutting through the smog like distant stars. Mara motioned for the team to halt and crouch behind a pile of rubble. "Listen up," Mara said, her voice barely a whisper but carrying the weight of command. "We're going to breach their outer perimeter. Keep your heads low, stay sharp. Once we're inside, it's all or nothing." Phelps gave a grim nod, his face smeared with dirt and blood. "Copy that." Mara's eyes flicked to her squad, for soldiers, their faces grim but resolute. Each of them had lost something in this war: family, friends, innocence. But they'd never lost their will to fight. If she could hold on to that, maybe they could survive this. Maybe humanity could still win. With a signal, they moved forward. They moved like shadows, silent and quick, weaving between shattered walls and crumbling defenses. The deeper they ventured into the heart of the Zythar stronghold, the more palpable the silence became. It was as if the world itself had held its breath. "We're almost there," said Jensen, one of the soldiers, his voice tight with anticipation. "They've got a breach shield set up, Captain. We'll need to disable it before we can get through." Mara nodded, her mind already racing through the tactics. They didn't have much time before the Zythar realized what was happening. "Phelps, get to the console. Jensen, cover him." The two soldiers moved swiftly into position, their training evident in the fluidity of their actions. Mara stood at the ready, watching their every move. Every second felt like an eternity. The distant hum of alien engines grew louder, signaling that the Zythar were mobilizing. Suddenly, the ground trembled again, this time with more force. Mara's pulse quickened. "They've detected us," Phelps muttered through the comms. The breach shield was active now, a pulsating wall of energy flickering just ahead. But the device was not impenetrable. If they could disable it in time, they could breach the command center and unleash everything they had left. Jensen's rifle snapped into position, his eyes trained on the approaching Zythar forces. He pulled the trigger in a steady rhythm, a series of sharp cracks ringing out as the first wave of alien soldiers staggered under his fire. "I've got your back, Phelps." Mara's heart pounded in her chest as Phelps worked quickly at the console. She could see his fingers flying over the alien interface, his face tight with concentration. The Zythar were closing in. The minutes they had left were slipping away. Her breath came faster. "We don't have much time," Phelps said, sweat beading on his brow. "I'm almost through, just hold them off for a few more seconds." A loud crackle echoed in the comms. One of the squad members cursed, and Mara's gaze snapped to the new threat emerging from the shadows. Zythar soldiers in heavy exosuits, their hulking forms nearly invisible in the dim light, charged toward them with frightening speed. Jensen's rifle spat fire, but the rounds barely made a dent. The enemy's armor was impenetrable. Panic surged through Mara's chest. "Keep firing," she shouted, her voice hoarse with urgency. "Phelps, hurry!" The seconds stretched endlessly. Mara's hands tightened around her weapon, but even as the Zythar closed in, she refused to retreat. Not now. Not when they were this close. Finally, Phelps's voice broke through the chaos, thick with relief. "It's down!" Without missing a beat, Mara signaled for the team to charge. "Move out. We take this fight to them." The squad surged forward, weapons raised. As the breach shield fell silent, the door to the command center loomed ahead, a dark threshold to their fate. And then, just as they were about to breach, a deafening roar shook the ground beneath them. Something far worse than they had expected was coming. The roar of the ground-shaking explosion reverberated through the base, its fury rippling out like a wave crashing against the shore. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze, and the world held its breath. The deep rumble settled into an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of frantic footsteps and the heavy, strained breathing of Mara Quinn's team. Mara's heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't flinch. The Zythar had just unleashed something catastrophic, something worse than the horrifying machines they had seen so far. It wasn't the rumbling beneath her feet that rattled her, it was the sheer terror in her squad's eyes as they watched the horizon. What had just appeared from the wreckage could only be described as a monster, a towering behemoth with dark metallic skin, and weapons that made even the fiercest of human artillery look like toys. Her pulse quickened, but her voice was steady. "Get ready. This isn't over." Phelps and the rest of the squad exchanged grim looks as the massive Zythar war machine approached, its many limbs coiling and shifting with inhuman grace. Despite the sheer size of the monstrosity, it moved with the fluidity of a predator stalking its prey. Its armored plating reflected the dim, fiery light from the destroyed structures, giving it an almost unreal, otherworldly presence. A voice crackled through the comms, terse and panicked. "Captain Quinn. You need to fall back. The Zythar are adapting too quickly. We can't hold them off." "We fight," Mara replied, her words cold, like the edge of a blade. "We fight because humanity doesn't know how to give up." The enemy war machine stopped just a few hundred meters away, its mechanical eyes glowing red. The air around them felt charged, as if something ancient and predatory was drawing closer. Even the soldiers who had fought through countless battles felt the weight of this moment. This was no ordinary enemy. Jensen, who had been keeping a close watch on the horizon, grunted and set his rifle to his shoulder. "Captain, we're surrounded." Mara's gaze swept the battlefield, her sharp eyes noticing the encroaching Zythar forces closing in on their position. Her breath steady, her movements slow but deliberate, she signaled the team to spread out. "Take positions. We're holding the line." The squad moved swiftly, falling into position with practiced precision. The Zythar, despite their overwhelming presence, hadn't yet made their final assault. It was as if they were studying the humans, calculating their next move with cold intelligence. Mara could feel the weight of this moment settling in. This would be their last stand. Phelps moved to Mara's side, his voice a growl. "You're sure about this? We can't hold forever." "We've held longer than anyone thought possible," she said, her eyes never leaving the enemy lines. "This is humanity's fight. We're going to show them that we can adapt, too." The Zythar war machine took a slow, deliberate step forward, and without warning, a blast of energy surged toward them, ripping through the air with a deafening roar. A nearby building was obliterated in an instant, and debris rained down around them. The explosion sent a shockwave through the ground, knocking Mara to her knees. Her vision blurred, but she forced herself to stand. "Everyone, stay down," she barked into the comms, struggling to steady herself. "Return fire, now." The squad opened fire, their weapons crackling with energy as they targeted the massive war machine. Mara's mind raced, calculating every possibility, every potential move. This wasn't just a physical fight, it was a test of everything humanity had learned about survival. They had to fight smart. The Zythar machine recoiled slightly, its thick hide absorbing most of the impact, but it was still slowed. Mara didn't waste the opportunity. "Jensen. Phelps. Distraction. I'm going in." Phelps's eyes widened with disbelief. "Captain, that's insane. Do you want to win this war or not?" she interrupted, already moving forward, her footsteps steady and purposeful. "Cover me." She sprinted toward the war machine, dodging debris and laser blasts as they shot toward her. Her heart raced, but there was no fear. She had been in countless battles before, but this felt different. The weight of what she carried was heavier now. She wasn't just fighting for survival, she was fighting to prove that humanity's will to endure was stronger than anything the Zythar could throw at them. As she neared the war machine, she saw its vulnerabilities, joints in its armor that, if struck just right, could disable its movement. She ducked behind a piece of debris, narrowly avoiding a deadly blast, and took a deep breath. This was her moment. The team's distraction had worked, the Zythar were focused on them now. Mara pressed herself against the broken structure, pulling out a small device from her pack. It was their last chance. 15 seconds, Mara muttered to herself, glancing at the timer. She threw herself from her cover, rolling to her feet. In one smooth motion, she activated the device and hurled it toward the machine's exposed joints. It lodged into a gap, and she barely managed to dive back behind cover before the explosion sent a ripple through the air. The war machine screeched in pain as its massive body staggered, sparks flying from the damaged area. The squad erupted into a roar of gunfire. It was working. They could bring it down. But before they could react, the sky above them darkened. A new, far more ominous ship descended from the clouds. Larger. Darker. And it was not alone. More ships were following. "We've only just begun," Mara whispered to herself, feeling the rush of defiance course through her veins. This was it. This was the moment that would define humanity's future. And she would lead them to victory, no matter the cost. The sky had turned a deep, oppressive gray, the storm clouds thick and swirling as if they too were part of the impending destruction. Mara Quinn stood with her squad, eyes locked on the new threat descending from the heavens. The sheer size of the ships was unimaginable, massive warships that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. Captain, Phelps's voice crackled through the comms, his words laced with disbelief. This isn't just a counterattack. It's an invasion. Mara's jaw clenched. Stay focused. They've just exposed their hand. Now we have to take the fight to them. Above them, the first Scythar ship opened fire, a massive beam of energy streaking down from the clouds. It tore into the base below, sending a column of smoke and debris spiraling into the air. The ground beneath Mara's feet trembled. She could feel the heat from the blast radiating against her skin. Move, 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 she shouted, breaking into a sprint, the urgency in her voice unmistakable. The squad followed her without hesitation, their training kicking in. They had trained for moments like this, but even Mara wasn't sure how much more they could take. The Scythar were relentless. Their ships weren't just attacking, they were systematically obliterating everything in their path. The initial strike was only the beginning. Other ships were coming, their engines roaring like 1,000 thunderstorms. We need to get inside, Mara said, her voice low but firm, eyes scanning the rapidly deteriorating battlefield. Phelps, Jensen, lead the way to the underground hangar. We'll make our stand there. Phelps gave a sharp nod. Understood, Captain. The squad moved quickly, weaving through the crumbling remnants of the once vibrant base. Mara's mind raced as she processed everything. The Scythar had clearly underestimated humanity's resilience, but now they were pulling out all the stops. The war was no longer about survival. It was about sending a message. Humanity would not be cowed. As they reached the underground hangar, Mara's heart skipped a beat. The doors to the facility had been blown open, leaving the way unguarded. The air inside smelled of burnt metal and acrid smoke, but it was their only chance. Inside, their last remaining fighters, those who had been trapped when the first waves hit, were waiting, grim but resolute. Mara made her way to the command center, where Lieutenant Rowe was overseeing the last preparations. His face was drawn, his eyes hard from days of sleeplessness. Captain, he said, the tension in his voice palpable, we're running out of time. The Scythar are closing in. If we don't hit them soon, it'll be too late. Mara stopped in front of him, her gaze steady. We've fought this long. We'll fight until the last breath. She turned to the rest of the squad, who had gathered around, awaiting orders. The room felt suffocating, the weight of their predicament heavy on everyone's shoulders. The Scythar were coming, there was no doubt about it. But Mara knew one thing, they were humans, and humans always fought for something bigger than themselves. They fought for hope. We're not running, she said, her voice echoing in the steel-walled room. We're going to hit them first. They may have the numbers, but we have something they don't, our will. Let's show them that. The team exchanged determined looks. They were all in this together, and they knew it. Their fate was tied to the outcome of the battle. The squad leader, Mara Quinn, had never wavered, she had led them through impossible odds before. Now was no different. The silence was broken only by the hum of the weaponry charging. The last remnants of humanity's fleet were ready. Phelps gave her a nod. Weapons primed, Captain. Move out, she ordered. We take the fight to them. The hangar doors slammed open, and the team rushed forward, stepping into the waiting vehicles that would take them to the front lines. The roar of engines and the hum of weapon systems filled the air. Mara didn't flinch. Every step she took was one closer to the final confrontation. They were going to face the Scythar head-on, and this time, they wouldn't back down. The team split into two groups, each assigned a different target. Mara's focus was unwavering as she looked up at the ships descending from the clouds. They were coming down with devastating force, their weapons glowing bright. The next few minutes would decide everything. Phelps's voice came through the comms. They've got us in their sights. Not for long, Mara replied, determination in her voice. She tapped the side of her helmet, activating a series of last-minute maneuvers on their vehicles. We're not just going to survive this, we're going to end it. The countdown on her HUD flickered, and in that brief moment, it felt like time slowed. She could hear the distant rumble of the Scythar ships as they readied to strike. But Mara Quinn wasn't afraid. She was ready. The fate of humanity would be decided in the next few moments, but one thing was certain: they would fight until the very last second. The battlefield stretched out before them. And then, with a deafening roar, the battle for humanity's future began in earnest. The rumble of distant explosions reverberated through Mara Quinn's bones as she and her squad raced toward the heart of the battlefield. The sky above them was a chaotic tapestry of flashing lights, the deep hum of enemy ships tearing through the air like an unnatural storm. The Zythar had underestimated humanity's drive to survive, but now, Mara knew they would witness the cost of that mistake. As they neared the battlefield's edge, Mara signaled to the others to halt. They huddled behind a crumbling wall, crouched low, breath shallow with anticipation. The adrenaline coursing through her veins was a sharp contrast to the cold resolve settling into her gut. This was it. There would be no retreat, no more desperate calls for help. Humanity's fight for survival had come down to this moment. "Captain," Phelps whispered, his face lit only by the faint glow of his helmet's HUD. "We have one shot at this." Mara's eyes narrowed, scanning the scene ahead. The massive Zythar ships hovered ominously, their sleek forms a silhouette against the swirling storm clouds. They had built their empire on fear, on overwhelming might. But now, humanity had something far more dangerous than firepower: the will to fight for their future. "We hit them hard and fast," she said, her voice low but full of fire. "All we need is to breach their shields long enough for the explosives to hit their core. Once we do that, it's over." Jensen, the newest member of their squad, shifted nervously. "What if we can't breach their shields, Captain?" Mara met his eyes, a fierce determination in her gaze. "We'll make them vulnerable." Phelps nodded, tapping into his console. "Weapons are ready, Captain. We can initiate the strike in 5 minutes." "Then we move in," Mara replied, her voice cutting through the tension. "Stay sharp. If we fail, humanity's hope dies with us." With one final glance, Mara led the team out from their cover and into the open battlefield. The ground was scarred with deep craters, and the air was thick with the scent of burning debris. But none of that mattered. What mattered now was taking down the Zythar's fleet and securing humanity's future. As they sprinted toward their target, a shrill warning blared in Mara's helmet. A Zythar fighter swooped down from the clouds, its weapons primed and aimed directly at them. "Incoming!" Jensen shouted, diving behind a piece of wreckage. The air filled with the shriek of energy blasts as the fighter opened fire. Mara dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the deadly beams. She rolled and came to her feet, raising her weapon and firing back with calculated precision. The fighter's shields flared briefly before its energy core detonated in a blinding explosion. "Good shot, Captain!" Phelps yelled, but Mara didn't reply. She was already moving, the mission far from over. The team reached their designated positions, the core of the Zythar fleet. Mara's heart hammered in her chest as she connected her weapon to the terminal, the countdown beginning. 10 seconds, she muttered, her eyes locked on the enormous Zythar ship hovering above them. The countdown rang through her helmet as the team took their positions. "Fire in 3, 2, 1. The ground shuddered as a burst of energy shot out from the ground-mounted cannon, aimed directly at the core of the Zythar ship. The shields flared, a sudden pulse of resistance, but the blast punched through, exposing the vulnerable heart of the vessel. "Now!" Mara screamed, pulling the detonator from her pack and slamming her finger down on the button. The explosion that followed was deafening. A shockwave tore through the air, knocking Mara off her feet. The sound of crumbling metal and the explosion of the Zythar ship echoed in her mind as she scrambled to her knees. She could hear the roars of victory from her squad, but her focus remained fixed on the smoke and fire now consuming the enemy ship. But as the smoke began to clear, something wasn't right. The Zythar fleet wasn't retreating. They were regrouping. Mara's eyes narrowed. More ships were emerging from the clouds. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of their final assault. The Zythar weren't just attacking, they were going to wipe humanity from the face of the planet. "No!" Mara shouted. We need reinforcements. Now. Her comms crackled to life, but it wasn't a voice she recognized. It was distorted, garbled, and then came the chilling, guttural sound of the Zythar leader's voice. You've only delayed the inevitable, it said, cold and mocking. You are nothing more than insects beneath our boots. Mara's pulse quickened, but she refused to give in. She was humanity's last line of defense, and she would stand her ground, no matter the odds. We've held our ground before, she replied, her voice steady but resolute. And we'll do it again. You won't win. The Zythar laughed, their voices like a chorus of death. But Mara Quinn wasn't done. Get ready, squad. This is the final fight. Humanity's future doesn't belong to them. With that, they charged, once again into the heart of the storm, ready to fight for a future that still belonged to them.